Good evening and welcome to our first 2023 lecture in our Understanding ADHD series. I'm Pam Barton, the coordinator for the Northern Virginia and DC chapter of CHAD. Tonight, we are so pleased to have Janet Price from Essig Education Group present #winning, what does a successful post-secondary transition look like? Our chapter, CHAD of Northern Virginia and DC, is one of the many chapters in CHAD National's organization, and as such, we align ourselves with the national mission of improving the lives affected by ADHD. We're a volunteer organization of trained professionals who offer support in a number of ways. In addition to offering this free monthly lecture series on the second Tuesday of most months, we also have support groups for parents and adults, as well as an annual resource fair to highlight ADHD Awareness Month. While we are all volunteers, we cover other expenses through membership, dues, donations, and sponsorship. So please consider becoming a member and help us support our cause. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Janet Price is a gap year consultant with Essig Education Group, a member of the Gap Year Association, and a member of the board of directors of the Novus Academy in Grapevine, Texas. Janet is a co-author of the award-winning Take Control of Asperger's Syndrome, the official strategy guide for teens with AS and NVLD, and its follow-up, Take Control of Dyslexia and Other Reading Difficulties, the ultimate guide for kids, as well as numerous articles on a variety of special education topics. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in special education, both as a professional advocate for families and on the admissions end working with a national post-secondary support program. Thank you, Janet, for providing your expertise to our audience this evening.
My pleasure. And before I begin, I'll just mention that we're going to hold questions until the end, but you are welcome to put them into the chat, and that will be monitored, and we will definitely have time to get to that. So if you'll bear with me, I will share my screen, and there we go. #winning. What does a successful post-secondary transition look like? And one moment, let me just try this again. And okay. There we go. Today we are going to discuss how to prepare for the post-secondary transition, differences in supports between high school and college. We are going to talk about what are your options besides going straight to college out of high school. And finally, we're going to put it all in perspective to see how no matter what path you choose, we can look at it as a win for sure. So the first thing that I like to talk about is the difference between college capable and college ready. Many of our students have really high GPAs, and certainly in the DC metro area, college is a given. It's always part of the conversation, and it's an expectation. But good grades are not the only indicator of college readiness. And in fact, they're not even the best indicator of college readiness, especially for students with ADHD, executive dysfunction, or other learning differences. Why is that? Because when you look at that high GPA, what you don't see is all of the support that's going on behind it. And that might take the form of an IEP. It might take the form of accommodations in a 504 plan. It might be that your child is in a small supportive private school. There are so many wonderful ones in the DC metro area. And those supports, the executive function support, other supports are just kind of baked into the programming. Or it might be that your child is receiving executive function or tutoring support outside of school to help supplement what they are doing in school. And finally, of course, mom and dad are there as a major source of support. So in other words, behind the high school GPA is a huge safety net. Now, we're often aware of it as parents, Our students, sometimes not so much. This is just what they're accustomed to, and they may not understand all of the support that's going on behind the scenes. So you get students with a very high GPA who are figuring, okay, I can do this, I'm ready for college. And even more dangerous is they may say, I don't need any support. I have good grades and I can go on to college. So we're going to talk about why that's not necessarily the case, and also what different supports can look like, because there are many, many ways to achieve success. So first of all, we have to understand the differences between supports in high school, what's expected and what is allowed under law, how that differs post-secondary at the college level. Because what we're doing is we're changing legal paradigms. We're going from FAPE, free and appropriate public education, under IDEA, moving towards the Americans with Disabilities Act. Section 504 also is appropriate to both arenas, but is administered differently. So in high school, students may have an IEP or that 504 plan. In college, students will have accommodations. I've had parents ask me, since Section 504 applies in college, do you get a 504 plan? And the answer is not the kind that you're used to in high school, because the types of accommodations, again, are going to differ. And we're going to talk about how the accommodations are not automatically granted. And it's not called a 504 plan. I had a parent come to me once, and I love to tell this story. And she said, I asked the college disability office, why can't I get a 504 plan for my daughter? And they said they don't give them. And I said, well, that's true. What is it that your daughter needs? And she says, extra time. So we walked through how to go ahead and give her extra time as an accommodation. It was really just a matter of semantics. So we'll get to that momentarily. But like I said, you're moving from a paradigm of IDEA, of entitlement, entitled to free and appropriate public education, to equal access. No one is entitled to go to college. Okay, you have to apply, you have to be accepted and admitted, and you become, rather than a student with a disability as you are under IDEA, you become a qualified student with a disability. So you would otherwise meet those qualifications to get into the program, but you are allowed accommodations so that you can access the program in the same manner as your non-disabled peers. So as I mentioned, accommodations at the high school level generally are automatically granted. We expect the teachers to be familiar with and to follow the IEP. We expect them to follow the accommodations in a 504 plan. If a student is getting extra time on an exam, we are expecting that the teacher is coming to get them and moving them to a small setting and granting them that extra time. This is completely different at the college level. At the college level, it is the student who is responsible for identifying themselves as having a disability. And it's a multi-level process to do that. Every college has a disability support office. The student needs to go there at the beginning of, or ideally prior to, the start of the semester. Come in there, I'm a student with ADHD, I am a student with a learning difference. You'll need to provide some support for that, typically in the form of a psychoeducational eval. Sometimes if you're looking at ADHD, a medical report is fine as well, a letter from a doctor. Colleges will tell you what they need. The Disability Support Office will take a look at it. The good news is it's very rare, like in high school, as it's sometimes a fight to get accommodations or support. It's very rarely a fight in college. It's usually approved. However, not right there as you're sitting there. They're going to take all of this information. They're going to take a look at it. They're going to give the student a letter listing the accommodations they are approved for, which differ vastly from the accommodations you can have in high school. And then the student is responsible for communicating this to each of their professors each semester. So you can see how much more of a burden there is in terms of executive function and self-advocacy, just to even get your support in college. An important piece of this, again, in high school, the teacher is expected to provide the supports, and in fact must under law, whereas in college, it is up to the student. They can choose to use their accommodations. They can choose not to. Unlike high school, if a student decides not to pursue their accommodations and they flunk out of a class, there is no going back and saying, hey, wait a minute, they didn't get to use their accommodations, we get a redo. Doesn't happen at the college level. The burden of responsibility is on the student, not on the professor. One thing that you can do in high school with an IEP is content modification. And that can be something as simple as, oh, you've got dysgraphia and dyscalculia. So instead of doing 20 math problems, you're going to be able to do 10. That can't happen at the college level. There are no modifications. And the reason is colleges have to protect the fidelity of the college degree. If some students are meeting certain requirements and other students don't have to, that waters down and devalues the meaning of the college degree. So there are no modifications. In college, you will get a syllabus at the beginning of the year listing all of your classwork. In high school, you'll have a planner. You may even have support filling out that planner. And you'll be able to have support chunking out assignments, figuring out what's going on. Often you'll have your teacher taking a look at it, your parents taking a look at it. In college, the syllabus is it. Because it lists all of your assignments, you are expected to be able to chunk those out and allow the appropriate time. And for this reason, when you're looking at the accommodation of extra time, frequently in colleges, extra time is going to mean extra time on exams, but not extra time on assignments. In high school, sometimes there is little to no homework. There is a dramatic increase in homework and study time in college. And sometimes our smart, scattered students aren't necessarily prepared for this huge increase in expectations. And finally, in high school, free time is monitored. Even if you're not on top of your kids all the time, parents, guardians are there. They're around and aware of what kids are doing. They're home at a certain time going to bed. They're doing certain activities. They're reminded to study or do homework. On college, suddenly they've got all of this unstructured time, and it's going to be up to the students to use it wisely. So that's why, not to scare you, but that's why grades are not necessarily the best predictors of post-secondary success. Better predictors are self-advocacy skills, being able to represent yourself to that disability support office, being able to talk to your professor and advocate for your accommodations, being able to understand and ask for help, and being willing to make use of that help. All of that is really, really important at the post-secondary level. Executive function skills are crazy important. Looking at, how you need to take a look at that syllabus and break that down and get things in on time, even to get extra time on your exams. Often you're going to need to request that in advance. So knowing to put a little check on your calendar 2 weeks ahead of the test, I need to reserve the testing center and get my extra time, is something that's going to be crucial. And activities of daily living, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. So here are 3 signs that your child may not be ready to be going directly on to college. First of all, in the executive function realm, if he or she cannot manage assignments in high school independently, which means initiating, completing, and turning in their assignments, that's going to be very problematic at the secondary level. Now, note I said independently and not without support, because there are many forms of support that can help to enable independence. If a student can use a plan book independently without being checked by a teacher, by mom and dad, that becomes a tool. If a student can use iCal or Google Cal or set up any number of apps for homework reminders, these are technological tools that they can use independently, and that's great. That's very helpful. But again, if they're not doing it without reminders, they're not doing it independently. Now, when we talk about those activities of daily living, the life skills, I'm not talking so much about laundry and cooking. You know, we'd prefer our students not come home on the weekend with a big, huge bag of laundry, but let's face it, they're all going to do that at some point. It's not the end of the world. Students can be on a meal plan, so it's great if they can make some breakfast or lunch, but that's a skill that can be learned too. Now, what I'm talking about is hygiene, is sleep, getting enough sleep, electronics usage, being able to self-monitor and not spending all of that free time on the internet or gaming. Healthy eating, because a healthy body promotes a healthy brain and healthy habits. And again, we're talking about that management of free time. So these are all areas where you're going from being, you know, often heavily supported to that support just disappearing. So for parents, it's certainly important to be thinking about all of these skills in advance and making sure to promote independence in those areas. And again, if they're not there yet, it might be an indication that you need to take a pause. And finally, there are those students that need additional time for social emotional maturation, for self-regulation. Depression, anxiety can play a piece. But when we talk about gap years in just a moment, you'll see that I've often told families, just like you might hold a child back between preschool and kindergarten because they would benefit just from that extra year of maturity, that's sometimes a similar line of thinking to taking a year and taking some time off between high school graduation and starting college to allow for that extra year of maturity and skill building. The key is that you want to do it purposefully, not just a year of rest or wandering around or doing whatever you're going to do, but really matching those skills deficits with programs that can help to build those foundational skills and promote that readiness. So we're going to talk about various post-secondary options. There are several alternative paths. We're going to talk about 3 different types of them tonight. First of all, I mentioned we're going to talk about gap years. We're going to talk about supportive colleges and programs that go beyond the bare minimum of support that we just discussed. And we're going to talk about alternative post-secondary support programs, which aren't college, but which really pile on the independent living skills and the executive function skills and advocacy pieces. And there are pros and cons to all of these, which we'll also discuss. So first of all, talking about gap years, and these slides are courtesy of the Gap Year Association. I'm a member. If you are not, you can also join as a parent if you're interested. The Gap Year Association is a terrific clearinghouse for information. They are also the only group in the country that grants accreditation to gap year programs. And I'm also on the accreditation board and part of that process. It's very, very rigorous. It can take years, usually a year to 2 years for a program to gain that accreditation. So when you do see that GOIA accredited, it's really important. So what is a gap year? Most of us, when we think of that, we think of maybe Malia Obama. We think of maybe, you know, flying out to El Salvador and building houses. And certainly those things are part of the gap year experience, but it's really much more all encompassing than that. So first of all, gap year doesn't have to be a year. It can be a semester. It can be a shorter amount of time. Basically what it is experiential learning, hands-on, typically taken after high school and prior to either a career or post-secondary education. And in order to deepen one's practical, professional, and personal awareness. No 2 gap years are alike. And intentionality, again, meeting the need is super important when doing gap year planning. So a gap year or a gap semester, it can be international, it can be domestic, it can be work-related, or it can be study-related. The most important piece is that it should be and can be individualized. So some of these experiences, as you can see on this chart, include volunteering, enrichment classes. Maybe you need to take some time really learning to write for college before you're going to be successful. in college classes. It can be study abroad, either credit bearing or not. It can be working. Some of the work programs, you can actually receive money. And so put that towards your college tuition while you are working. There can be independent travel, an experiential semester, setting up a number of different experiences to match the needs that you have for social emotional growth. It can be interning, experimenting with career paths in a real world environment. There are programs, there are very good programs that address each of these things, or there are ways to individualize and set them up yourself. One of the best internship and work programs, which is right here in the DC area, is Broad Futures. This picture is from there, which also focuses particularly on students with ADHD and executive function and mild to moderate learning differences, matching them up with internship experiences. GYA has found through surveying its alumni, people who have taken gap years, the outcomes have been very, very positive. And GYA has been around for 10 years, so these are outcomes that are continuing to build. There's an increase in soft skills, being maturity, resiliency, ability to take perspective. There's an increase in hard skills, and that can be a foreign language. It can be professional experience or other skills. We tend to see an improved GPA in college among those who have taken some time off and taken some gap time. These students also tend to have more clarity around their career or major. College majors are something that are changing constantly. The average student, I believe, changes majors at least 3 times. And students who've had the benefit of a gap year experience often come with a more realistic idea of what they're interested in. Time to graduation is less, and that is surprising. But when you consider that by taking a pause and taking a step back, you are gaining in these hard skill and soft skill abilities and becoming more ready for post-secondary learning, then it does kind of follow that, okay, you may be able to finish that program in 4 years, whereas had you not had any support prior to college, it might have been a semester, maybe flunk some classes, maybe take a semester off, maybe go back and forth. So GYA does find that time to graduation actually lessens by taking a gap year. There are impacts on financial aid. You can earn money towards college. There are some programs, if you have a loan already, where the loan can be deferred. And we find improved maturity and campus engagement because these students in this experiential learning environment really need to call upon their leadership skills and their self-advocacy skills to get through. So they're able to transfer that to the campus environment. Gap year takes alumni surveys. And again, contrary to what you would think, just given the bias around the idea of a gap year, we find that 98% of students who took a gap year, and this was from 2020, so who took a 2019 gap year, said that they learned how to interact with people from backgrounds or cultures different from their own. 98% self-reported that it increased their maturity. 97% reported their self-confidence improved. 84% said their academic motivation improved. And that too, we find sometimes after high school, students are really just burned out. And so taking some time off to recharge, refresh, and become motivated again can be a good thing. 82% have found that they've had a competitive advantage when applying to college and or jobs, although we do recommend that you apply to college first, and we'll get to that in the next slide too. It has influenced choice of career, inspired volunteer work, influenced what people have chosen to study in higher education, increased political participation, especially with advocating for social issues, and influencing which college extracurriculars were of interest. So there are some concerns that people usually voice about a gap year. The first is, will a gap year hurt chances of getting accepted to college? And the answer overwhelmingly is no, it really will not. In fact, the evidence that GYA has collected has shown just the opposite. It really improves both college performance and acceptance. But more important than that, we also recommend that you go ahead and apply to college first and then defer and come back with your gap year. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Will a gap year student return to college? More often than not, the answer is absolutely, especially if the reason they've taken that gap again is burnout, disillusionment. It's an opportunity to pick up more practical skills and mature and appreciate the value of the education that you want to pursue. How do you find structured versus unstructured experiences? And again, GYA is a terrific source. There are gap year fairs around the country that you can look for. And there are gap year consultants like Essig Education Group and myself. And there are many others out there you can Google. How to pay for a gap year? There are many different ways and there are many different costs. Programs like Broad Futures are nonprofit and are funded and not terribly expensive. Other programs are more expensive, especially some of those overseas. There are programs that pay you to be there. And there are programs that are payable with 529 and other money. So wide variety of costs, wide variety of financial options. Is it safe? And this is where we want to look at the other part of this slide that says special concerns for students with ADHD and executive function. So the short answer is yes, a gap year, especially one that has been properly vetted, should have safety as paramount for the students. However, for students that have special considerations, in order to be safe and successful, we need to look at some particulars about the gap year. The first is essential eligibility criteria, EECs. Every structured program that you're going to look at will list their EECs. And these are basically the bare minimum skill set that a student must have in order to be successful in that program. So that's really the first thing to explore when you're interested in something. So for instance, if you're going to look at, and I'm just throwing this out, not that it's necessarily the appropriate program for this audience, but say you're going to look at semester at sea. Certainly one of their EECs is going to be student must know how to swim. Okay, it can be something as simple as that. But there are other EECs, including, you see, medication management. Very few GAP programs, structured programs, are going to have staff who will administer medicine. So you want to make sure if your student is taking any medications that they're able to do so independently and they will comply with the medication guidelines. There are some zero tolerance policies for drugs. There are some states where marijuana is legal. There are sometimes students who are used to being able to, vape or smoke or take an edible or whatever to sleep, to calm down. Be aware that there are some programs where, whether it's legal in your state or not, it will not be legal to do that on the program. Use of electronics. If that is a huge problem, that again may disqualify a student from a particular program. And there are some programs where you're out in the field and you can't even get a signal. You're expected not to be using electronics during the day. Students typically are going to need to be independent in their morning routine, just like there won't be someone administering medicine. A lot of times there won't be someone coming in for bed checks or waking you up. So that is something that students need to become accustomed to. An ability to follow a schedule. Again, they're not necessarily going to track you down if you're staying in bed and staying out, but that may end up that you're not successful in the program and sent home. So again, it's really important to assess these essential eligibility criteria prior to applying to any program. And also feel free to speak with staff on the program to kind of tease that out a little bit more in terms of expectations. Now, I mentioned we were going to talk about college again, and really the best advice for college is to apply first, get accepted, and defer your acceptance. While you're doing that, maintain a relationship with the admissions officer, create a portfolio while you're on your gap year, plan how you'll present your gap experiences in essays, on resumes, financial aid opportunities, again, looking at whether it's possible to earn college credit, to earn a salary during your gap year. And if you have to make a case to the college, most colleges will allow you to defer, not all of them. If you are working with a gap year counselor, that is somebody or a consultant, that's someone who can help you to make a case, to write a letter, to include information about, okay, this is my year-long plan. This is what I intend to learn from it. This is how I intend to apply it when I go, when I do attend college. And those are discussions that can be had. Things to be aware of, again, credit transfer versus incoming first year, and this is always important. Some colleges, if you're coming in as a freshman, will not allow you to transfer credit. Others have different types of rules, so just something you need to be aware of. Applying to colleges mid-program. So if you haven't done all of this legwork in advance, it may be something that you're going to have to do out in the field in order to make those deadlines for the following year. So all considerations. Know the data. So that is the gap year option. And again, I think the most important takeaway, two important takeaways from that are the essential eligibility criteria, making sure that you can meet those, and the ability to bypass structured programs altogether in favor of setting something up that's completely individualized. Take auditing a college class to learn how to manage your time and write essays while you have a volunteer work experience. And then maybe taking a 2 or 3 week program out of country to brush up on your Spanish. So there are many, many ways to put this together. And the important thing is to match the programming to your needs. Now, moving on to supportive colleges. If the idea is to go on to college, but there are some questions about some of those areas that we looked at in terms of, is the student ready? There are some options there too. First of all, colleges that change lives. If you're not familiar with it, it really is life-changing. This is a list of 40 schools that are small and supportive, and definitely good schools to look at in terms of making sure that that support is going to be wrapped around for your student. Again, they still have to abide by the laws at the college level and ADA, as opposed to the type of high school supports you're going to get. But these are colleges that are going to be much more amenable to students who learn differently and to their quirks. There are 2 colleges in the country, Beacon and Landmark, that they are the only 2 colleges specifically set up for students with ADHD, executive function, and mild to moderate learning disabilities. So their support, unlike other schools, is actually really baked into the program. You do get a 4-year degree from both of these. It is a completely valid, accredited college degree. There will be a much higher level of support in these colleges than you'll find throughout others. The really cool part is both Beacon and Landmark also have semester-long and 2 to 3 week-long summer programs. So another option, if you are planning to go directly to college, but you're thinking that you need a trial run or some support, are looking into some of these summer programs to provide you with that little bit of support. They call it almost a semester on steroids. So within 2 to 3 weeks, you are practicing those skills that are going to help bring success when you do go to college in the fall. There are other supportive colleges that have special learning programs, and these are above and beyond what is provided through the Disability Support Office. So they may require a separate application, and they will often require a cost on top of, in addition to the college tuition. But these programs, unlike your traditional supports in college, may provide more executive function support, study skills support, a mentor or an advisor as a touch point for different difficulties that may arise and how to work through them. So these are all things that you can work with a college consultant or do your own research and learn about these different types of programs that might make the difference between whether your student is college ready or not. And finally, we also have some alternative post-secondary support programs, and you may have heard some of these mentioned. There is the College Internship Program, CIP. There is College Living Experience, CLE, Mansfield Hall, and College Excel. For students, because this is a CHAD audience, one of the things that I really want to look at with some of the pros and cons of these programs is that they are often geared much more towards students with autism spectrum disorder. So if you're ASD/ADHD and looking for programs with that social skills piece and other pieces, this might be something that would be of interest to you. If you are a student who is college ready, but it's just that executive function piece that's getting in the way and needing some more support with that, these may be piling on too much support. It may not be the appropriate program for you. In all of these programs, there is a social skills component. It is mandatory. So again, if that is not a need, it may be overkill in your particular circumstance. These programs do really well with independent living skills, talking from the very basics, maintaining your room, laundry, cooking, budgeting. Again, so if that is something that is important in terms of support, that's where you might get something like this. These programs are very costly. It's going to cost as much as a year of college, sometimes more at some of these programs, and they are not necessarily degree bearing. So many of them, CIP, CLE, Mansfield Hall is attached to colleges, as is College Excel. But you're going to be taking, for some of these, a scaled back schedule. CIP and CLE in particular, you may only be taking 1 or 2 college classes at a time. So it's a very long trajectory for graduation, which is fine if that's what you need. But it may be more than you need when we're looking at our chat audience. So #winning, putting all of this in perspective. And these slides, I have to give a shout out to my colleague at Essig Education Group, Sarah Robison, who is our parent coach. And these are some of her go-to answers for a lot of these issues that come up. But the first one is, how do you talk to your child about taking a pause? Here in the DC metro area, it's really, again, kind of a given that you just go right from high school to college without a whole lot of introspection about whether you're really ready for that. And if you're not, you want to make sure that there is no shame in admitting that. And so it's important really to reframe the conversation and make it observational and not judgmental. And Sarah's suggestions for starting some of these conversations are really making them student focused, child focused, saying things like, I've noticed that you've been very stressed out lately. I've noticed that getting homework done on time has been a real challenge. And we're going to be having all these increased expectations in college. How's that making you feel? And being supportive about that. I don't want you to feel this way. What do you think about trying a different path, something first that will bring you to college, but make it easier all around? And if you're interested in this, it's something I would love for you. And just opening up that discussion, using whatever support systems you have in your village. It takes a village, whether it's a high school guidance counselor, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a social worker, whether it's an educational consultant, just really bringing as many perspectives into that conversation as you can to normalize this as a path, as valid as going directly from high school to college. Then we have our own expectations as parents too, because you really have to come to terms with modifying those as well. And it's normal to grieve a little bit, as long as you're not doing it in front of your child. Same thing with parents. Talk to someone that you trust, a therapist, a counselor for school, someone you trust in your family or in your circle, rather than looking at neighbors and classmates and other things. What is good for them is not necessarily the best idea for your child. And again, that leads to a changed perspective overall. This is why this is the right choice for my child. And the big picture is, in 20 years from now, is it going to make a difference? Where a child goes to college may make a difference in terms of getting their first job. After that, not at all. And sometimes not even then. And speaking as a parent of, a 26-year-old and a 30-year-old who are well past their education and in the work world, while you're in high school and college, it just seems you get so caught up in that. And it just seems like that's just everything, the most important need. When the truth is, those years, my friends, go very quickly. And the rest of their lives are using that degree or using their skills or using vocational skills and working, earning a living, and living independently. That's what success really is all about. And keep in mind that forcing something that isn't right because it's what a sibling did or what family did can negatively impact a relationship. And making sure, again, to take the perspective of the individual and not the external forces. So that's kind of hard to do in the social media echo chamber, isn't it? When you talk about how to mitigate the impact of social media, both for parents and students, it's important to understand that it's not something you can control, but you can control your response or your reaction. And it takes a lot of confidence to say, well, that's what they're doing, but I'm doing what's best for me. Two, social media also only shows what people want you to see. It's very much curated. We all know that. There's not always truth behind it. And a lot of students or a lot of parents who are bragging about a path that your student will never be able to take, there's no guarantee they're going to be successful in that path either. Let's check back in a year and see how that worked out for you. Drawing from your own self-confidence and the knowledge that you are doing what your child needs. And that's also something to be celebrated. And finally, take a social media break, for goodness sake. So some tangible ways to reframe the conversation. Love a good pro-con list that can really put things in perspective, especially when you have 1 or 2 pros and about 10 cons, and you can see, all right, well, that really isn't the best path for me to take then, is it? And another thing to make things just really more clear and more realistic, instead of just kind of going mentally, okay, I'm taking this break and then I'm going to go to college and then I'm going to do this, really lay it out on paper. This is what my trajectory looks like. This summer, this is what I'm doing. And then that's going to lead to this, my first semester of college, and that's going to lead to this. And all the dots connect. So those are just some ideas in terms of looking at this as the right thing to do and the best possible outcome for later on in life. So kind of wrapping up what we have spoken about. Areas that are necessary to assess in order to indicate college readiness. Certainly executive function skills. Want to look at metacognition, which means understanding how you learn. That's something that your child needs to know. They need to know what their learning profile is. They need to know what's helpful and what's not helpful. In terms of executive function, you want to make sure that they have appropriate study skills. Their time management is mature. They can plan and initiate, maintain, and complete tasks within a given time frame. Secondly, looking at self-advocacy skills, particularly willingness to ask for and use accommodations. And finally, those ADLs, the activities of daily living. Specifically, again, we are looking for independent management of medication, sleep routines, use of electronics, healthy eating, and ability to moderate one's free time. The options that are available, there are really many, many of them. You can talk about summer transition or pre-college programs like the ones offered by Landmark and Beacon, and there are others throughout the country as well. You can talk about college-based support programs, the kind that require an extra application. There may be an extra fee, but there is a lot more support than what you're going to see in a typical disability support office. There are 2 colleges in the country for students with learning disabilities, and those are Beacon College in Florida and Landmark in Vermont. You can look at a gap year, which can be individualized based on the student's needs and goals, and which can have tremendous positive outcomes when the student does return to college. And finally, you can look at post-secondary transition programs, which are appropriate for students who need extensive support, particularly in social skills and independent living skills, in addition to that, academic and executive function support. And these are students who will be on a much slower trajectory, which again is all fine, because it's really all about what does success look like at the end. And it can look like work, it can look like college, it can look like vocational, it can look like travel, and mostly it needs to look like the ability to live independently and earn a living. So we are Essig Education Group, and again, offer a variety of supports through that college transition process. But I hope that tonight's lecture kind of opened your eyes, not only as to the increased expectations that are coming down the road, but the many, many different ways of addressing skills deficits if your child is not ready to take that next step. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn the program back over to Chad.
Janet, thank you so much for all that amazing information. We have a couple of questions from the audience. The first question that came up was, what should someone do if their child's disability is self-advocacy, that is the disabling factor?
Mm-hmm. And what I would recommend is finding opportunities to practice that skill. Certainly it's going to depend on what age your child is. If your child has an IEP, it is super important that by junior year, they be actually leading that IEP meeting. And leading up to junior and senior year, there are opportunities for them to advocate as well. If they can't sit through an entire IEP meeting, at least coming in the last 15 or 20 minutes when most of the decisions have been made, but having an opportunity for the team leader to ask, these are the accommodations that we've come up with for you. What do you think of that? Do you think they're helpful? Are there things that you think are helpful that we've left out? Giving your child the chance to express that. Letting your child have some planned failure. It's really tough as parents to watch, our children not go back and ask to retake an exam, but sometimes learning by consequence and then walking them through that self-advocacy program to show how you can turn things around is very helpful for that. Normalizing self-advocacy. There's no weakness or harm in asking for help. I ask for help. You ask for help. Everyone asks for help with tasks they can't do. Nobody's perfect. And it's certainly not a sign of weakness or anything to be ashamed of. So any opportunities that you have for your student to practice that, working out with high school teachers, telling them that, listen, we want to work on self-advocacy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to encourage my student to email you with some questions about homework, about tests or whatever. And I'm going to give you a heads up about that. I'd really appreciate that if you could email them back thoughtfully and really help them grow through this process so that they can practice for when they get to college.
So someone else asked, can you recommend local colleges that have those support programs built into them that you mentioned?
That would probably be better for, I can recommend some really great college consulting groups, Judy Bass's group, Bass Education, Joan Witten's group, College Consulting Collaborative. are really great at individualizing that. I know that locally, I can think of a few. McDaniel has the Nailer Support Program, not McDaniel, I'm sorry. Davis and Elkins in West Virginia has the Nailer Support Program, which is very good, and they're a very small school. McDaniel College in Westminster, Maryland is known for being very supportive. I personally like Hood College in Frederick, even though that's not really the reputation. I have visited campus there. Again, a small supportive environment that's really welcoming. I would really encourage you when you do your college visits to stop in at the disability support office and ask these kinds of questions, because you're going to get different answers for each one. Some of the best advice I was given too is when you go to a college visit, a college open house, often, you know, you'll go into the gym or an auditorium and there are all these tables with different departments. Is the disability support represented there? Or is it just not spoken of? So that can give you an idea in your head as well. What else? American University has a good support system. GW, not so much. Just off the top of my head, that's some advice I can give.
But AU's is quite expensive. It's the add-on type, right? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Mhm.
Okay, next question. Do you recommend an outside company to assist students with their accommodations, such as College Success Plan?
I'm not familiar with College Success Plan, so I couldn't say one way or the other. But you know, certainly there are outside resources that can definitely help. I know of many companies that will do things like provide executive function coaching specifically for college, tutoring specifically for college. So sure, if if the supports that you're getting in the college are not doing the trick and you really think you just need a little extra bump as opposed to completely taking a step back, I think it would be great to look into some of those options.
So those are the questions we have. Does anyone else want to put a question out for Janet before we wrap up? I don't think so. Well, Janet, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. And you're getting a lot of thank yous, and we very much appreciate it. That contact information is there for anybody that wants to ask Janet anything else. I'm sure she can continue to work with anybody who's interested. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
But here we have another question. Do you work with
Oh,
families
okay.
remotely? There's families in New Jersey.
Yes. Yes. In fact, I used to live in the DC. Ooh, big secret. I used to live in the DC area. I'm now living in Williamsburg, Virginia. So hi from Williamsburg. Yes, I do work remotely.
And someone else has asked, will gap year programs accept students who are not already accepted into college?
Yes. Yes, they will. But be mindful, gap year programs have deadlines for application too, just like colleges do. So you do need to be mindful of those.
Thank you so much, Janet, for everything. This is wonderful information. And I want to tell the attendees that this lecture is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. And if you have registered through Eventbrite, you will get the link to revisit all of the information that Janet has provided today. And hopefully we'll get a handout of some sort to send to attendees so that they can review the material as well in a PDF or something like that. So thank you so much, Janet.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.